Some women count pregnancies, others count losses. But Mary Beth, she counted love. Every single heartbeat she carried was perfect, even if it was brief. The morning sun painted the fields gold, and Mary Beth Calloway stood at her kitchen window, watching her husband Frank chase their rooster round the chicken coop. Again. "Bonaparte, you feathered fool," Frank hollered, his work boots slipping in the mud as the ornery bird led him on another wild dance. "I'm just trying to collect eggs, not steal your girlfriend." Mary Beth laughed, the kind of laugh that starts in your belly and bubbles up like spring water. Even after 20 years of marriage, Frank could still make her forget everything except the moment. She was drying her hands on her apron when she felt it, that familiar flutter. Mary Beth Calloway had a secret, not the kind that hurt, not the kind that shamed, the kind that made her heart so full it sometimes felt like it might burst right there in the middle of her Tennessee kitchen. She loved being pregnant, every single time. Even knowing what she knew, even after what had happened before, her hand flew to her belly, and for one perfect second, the world stood still. Hope, dangerous, beautiful hope bloomed in her chest like wildflowers after rain. Maybe this time. The thought whispered through her mind before she could stop it, before she could protect herself with the careful walls she'd built after. "Don't think about it, not yet." Outside, Frank had apparently made peace with Bonaparte and was walking toward the house, egg basket in hand. That crooked grin she'd fallen for spread across his sun-weathered face. She met him at the door. "Caught you watching me make a fool of myself again," he said, setting down the basket and pulling her close. "That bird's got it out for me, I swear. Maybe if you stopped calling him Napoleon's cousin," Mary Beth said, breathing in the scent of hay and honest work that always clung to Frank's shirt. "His name is Bonaparte. You named him that. Well, someone's got to keep his ego in check." They were both laughing when Mary Beth took his calloused hand and placed it on her belly. Frank's eyes went wide, then soft, then careful, the way they always did when hope knocked on their door. "Beth," she nodded. "Number 6. Frank set down his coffee and crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, pulling her into his arms like she was made of spun glass and dreams. "You sure?" "Sure as sunrise." They stood there in their farmhouse kitchen, holding each other while the bacon sizzled and Bonaparte the rooster announced the day. To anyone willing to listen, 20 years of marriage, 5 pregnancies behind them, for tiny graves under the oak tree. But Mary Beth wasn't thinking about the graves. She was thinking about the baby, this baby, the one growing inside her right now. Perfect and loved and completely hers for however long God saw fit to loan them to each other. "I know what you're thinking," Frank said quietly, his cheek against her hair. "But Beth, I'm not thinking anything except how lucky I am," she interrupted. "How lucky we are to get to do this again, to love another baby, to give them everything we have for as long as we have them." Frank pulled back to look at her face. After 5 pregnancies, for losses, and enough heartbreak to bury most couples, Mary Beth still looked at pregnancy like it was Christmas morning. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you still get excited? Because each one is perfect, Frank. Sarah was perfect for 6 months. Michael was perfect for 2 years. Little Anna was perfect for almost 3. Baby James was perfect for the 4 hours I held him." Her voice never wavered, never broke, just filled with the kind of love that doesn't count cost. "And this one will be perfect too, for however long we get." Frank shook his head in wonder. "Mary Beth Calloway, you are either the strongest woman alive or completely crazy. Can't I be both?" That afternoon, Dr. Morrison confirmed what Mary Beth already knew. She was 8 weeks along, healthy as a horse, and according to all medical indicators, everything looked good. "But Mary Beth," he said gently, removing his stethoscope, "given your history, I know, Doc. But Frank and we've decided something." She glanced at her husband, who nodded encouragingly. "We're not going to spend this pregnancy waiting for tragedy. We're going to spend it loving this baby every single day." Dr. Morrison, who had delivered half the county and buried too many dreams to count, smiled despite himself. "Well then, I guess we better take real good care of all 3 of you." That night, Mary Beth pulled out the box she kept hidden in their bedroom closet. Not hidden from Frank, he knew exactly where it was. Hidden from the well-meaning friends who thought it was unhealthy to keep reminders. Inside were booties, tiny hats, a receiving blanket her mother had crocheted, for hospital bracelets, impossibly small, a lock of hair so fine it looked like spun gold, and photos, so many photos. Sarah's first smile, Michael taking his first steps, Anna singing her garbled version of Jesus Loves Me, baby James sleeping peacefully in Mary Beth's arms for the only 4 hours he ever drew breath. Look, she whispered to her belly, spreading the photos across the quilt Frank's grandmother had made. These are your big brothers and sisters. They're waiting for you up in heaven. But don't worry about that now. Right now, you just focus on growing. She picked up Sarah's photo, a chubby baby with Frank's nose and Mary Beth's stubborn chin. Sarah was my little helper. Even as a baby, she tried to take care of everyone. Michael was our adventurer, never met a mud puddle he didn't want to jump in. Anna was our sunshine. She woke up every morning like the world was full of presents, just for her. And James was our peaceful one. Never cried, never fussed, just looked at us like he understood exactly how much we loved him. Frank appeared in the doorway, watching his wife introduce their new baby to the siblings who had gone before. "What do you think this one will be?" he asked, settling beside her on the bed. Mary Beth closed her eyes, one hand on her belly, feeling for that flutter of life that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "I think this one will be our keeper," she said quietly. "I think this one will stay." She opened her eyes, looking at Frank with complete certainty. "But even if they don't, Frank, even if we only get a few days or weeks or months, they'll still be ours. They'll still be loved. They'll still be perfect." Frank reached over and touched the photos scattered between them. "You really believe that?" "I know that. Love doesn't end just because breathing does. And being a mother, that doesn't end either. I'm already mother to 5 babies, Frank. This one makes 6. However this turns out, I'm their mama forever." Outside their bedroom window, the oak tree stood sentinel over for small graves marked with wooden crosses Frank had carved by hand. But Mary Beth wasn't looking at the graves. She was looking at the wildflowers that had grown around them. Volunteers, Frank called them. Seeds blown by wind, planted by birds, taking root in soil made sacred by love and loss. Beautiful things growing from sorrow. Hope blooming where grief had been planted. Just like the baby growing inside her now. "I love you, Mary Beth Calloway," Frank said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you too. And I love this baby. And I loved all the others." She gathered the photos back into their box, handling each one like a prayer. "That's what makes us rich, Frank. Not what we've lost, what we've loved." The pregnancy progressed like a song Mary Beth had hummed all her life, but never dared believe. She'd sing all the way through. At 12 weeks, she felt the first flutter. At 16 weeks, Dr. Morrison heard a strong, steady heartbeat that made Frank cry right there in the examination room. At 20 weeks, they learned they were having a boy, Samuel. Mary Beth said without hesitation, "Samuel Hope Calloway." "Why, Samuel?" Frank asked as they drove home. Mary Beth's ultrasound photos spread across her lap like treasures. "Because it means God heard, and I think He's been listening to us all along." This pregnancy was different. Not because Mary Beth felt healthier or stronger, though she did. Not because the doctors seemed more optimistic, though they were. Different because Mary Beth had finally learned the difference between hope and expectation. She hoped Samuel would stay, but she didn't expect him to. She simply loved him day by day, kick by kick, hiccup by hiccup, with the kind of present tense love that doesn't bargain with tomorrow. Every morning, she'd place both hands on her growing belly and say, "Good morning, Samuel. Thank you for another day with Mama." Every night, she'd whisper, "Sleep tight, sweet boy. See you in the morning." She never said, "See you when you're born" or "See you when you're grown." Just tomorrow, one day at a time. Frank, meanwhile, had turned into what Mary Beth lovingly called a man possessed. He baby-proofed the house twice. He researched cribs for 3 months before ordering one. He read every parenting book he could find, taking notes like he was studying for the most important test of his life. "Frank, honey," Mary Beth said one evening, Finding him installing his fourth set of cabinet locks, the baby won't even be. Crawling for months, safety first, he muttered, adjusting a corner guard on the coffee table. Besides, gives me something to do with my hands. Mary Beth understood. Frank needed to build and prepare and create safety where none had existed. Before, it was his way of loving. Just like carrying each baby with complete presence was hers. At 32 weeks, Mary Beth went into early labor. She woke Frank gently, her hand on his shoulder. Her voice calm as still water. It's time. Frank's eyes flew open. Time, or false alarm time. Time. They drove to the hospital in the pre-dawn darkness. Mary Beth breathing through contractions while Frank gripped the steering wheel, and probably broke every speed limit between their farm and town. Too early, Frank kept muttering. It's too early. Samuel will be fine. Mary Beth said with the kind of certainty that comes from somewhere deeper than medical knowledge. He's ready to meet us. Samuel Hope Calloway arrived at 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, weighing 4 pounds, 2 ounces, and announcing his presence with a cry that could be heard 3 rooms away. Healthy lungs, Dr. Morrison said, grinning as he placed the tiny, perfect baby on Mary Beth's chest. Small, but mighty. Mary Beth looked down at her son, actually looked at him, breathing and moving and real, and felt something she'd never experienced before. Not just love, not just joy, but completion. Hello, Samuel, she whispered. I've been waiting for you my whole life. Frank touched one finger to Samuel's impossibly small hand, and the baby's fingers wrapped around it with surprising strength. Strong grip, Frank said. His voice cracked with wonder. That's my boy. Samuel spent 2 weeks in the NICU, growing stronger every day. Mary Beth practically lived at the hospital, learning to feed him through tubes, change diapers that seemed too big for his tiny body, and sing lullabies to a baby who fit in her cupped hands. He's a fighter, the nurses said. Look at those eyes. He knows exactly where he wants to be. When they finally brought Samuel home, Mary Beth carried him straight to the window that looked out over the oak tree and the wildflowers. See those flowers, baby? Those are from your brothers and sisters. They're saying hello. Frank stood beside them, one arm around Mary Beth, one finger stroking Samuel's soft hair. Think they're happy? He asked. I think they sent him to us, Mary Beth said. I think they've been waiting for us to be ready. Samuel thrived. He gained weight, hit every milestone, and developed what Mary Beth called the Calloway stubborn streak early and with enthusiasm. He slept through the night at 8 weeks, smiled at 6 weeks, and seemed to find Frank's terrible jokes genuinely hilarious even before he could understand them. Smart kid, Frank said, making faces at his son across the breakfast table. Knows quality humor when he hears it. Your daddy is silly, Mary Beth told Samuel, who giggled and reached for Frank's nose. But we love him anyway. When Samuel was 18 months old, Mary Beth made an announcement that surprised even her. I'm pregnant again. Frank, who was feeding Samuel breakfast, dropped the spoon. Samuel, delighted by this development, immediately began flinging Cheerios to see if Daddy would drop those 2 again. Already, number 7, Mary Beth said, settling into her chair with that familiar glow Frank had learned to recognize and love. Due in October, Frank looked at Samuel, who was now wearing more breakfast than he was eating, then at Mary Beth, who was radiating the kind of joy that made the whole kitchen seem brighter. 2 kids. He said slowly, 2 kids. Can we handle the kids, Mary? Beth laughed, reaching over to clean Cheerios out of Samuel's hair. Frank Calloway. We've loved 6 babies and raised 1 miracle. I think we can handle whatever God sees fit to bless us with. This pregnancy was easier. Maybe because Mary Beth's body knew what it was doing now. Maybe because she spent less time worrying and more time chasing a toddler who had recently discovered he could climb. Maybe because she finally, completely, believed that sometimes dreams really do come true. Thomas James Calloway arrived right on schedule in October, weighing a healthy 7 pounds and looking, according to everyone who saw him, exactly like his father. Poor kid, Frank said, holding his newest son while Samuel helped by patting the baby's head with sticky fingers. Stuck with my face. I love your face, Mary Beth said. settling beside them on the couch. And I love his face, and I love this whole beautiful, perfect family we've made. Samuel, not to be outdone, leaned over and very carefully kissed his baby brother's forehead. "My baby," he announced with 2-year-old authority. "Our baby," Mary Beth corrected gently. "Our baby," Samuel agreed, then went back to examining Thomas's tiny fingers with the intense concentration of a child discovering miracles. That night, after both boys were asleep, Mary Beth and Frank stood in the nursery doorway, watching their sons breathe. "We did it," Frank whispered. "We did. To healthy, beautiful boys, to keepers." Frank was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you think the others know about Samuel and Thomas?" Mary Beth smiled, remembering all the photos hidden in her closet. All the memories she carried like treasures. "I think they've been watching over them from the beginning. I think they helped them find their way to us. Yeah. Some families are made on earth. Some are made in heaven. But ours was made in both places." The years that followed were filled with the beautiful chaos of raising two boys who seemed determined to explore every corner of their Tennessee farm. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful child who collected rocks, asked endless questions about how things worked, and appointed himself his little brother's chief protector. Thomas was the adventurer, fearless, curious, and somehow always covered in mud despite Mary Beth's best efforts. "They're like you and your brother were," Mary Beth's mother said during one of her visits, watching the boys build an elaborate fort out of hay bales. "Samuel's got your careful nature, and Thomas has your wild streak." "I wasn't wild," Mary Beth protested. "Honey, you once tried to teach the neighbor's cow to dance. That was educational," Frank, overhearing from the porch, called out. "She still does that. Caught her waltzing with Bonaparte last week." The boys thought this was hilarious. Mary Beth threw a dish towel at her husband, who caught it and used it to take an elaborate bow. This was their life now. Laughter and noise and sticky fingers and bedtime stories that went on too long because nobody wanted the day to end. But Mary Beth never forgot the quieter love that had come before. Every year on the anniversary of each child's birth and death, she would visit the oak tree. She'd bring fresh wildflower seeds, update them on Samuel and Thomas's latest adventures, and thank them for sending their little brothers to her. Sarah would have loved teaching them to braid daisy chains, she'd say, scattering seeds around the oldest grave. Michael would have shown them every good climbing tree on the property. Anna would have made them laugh until their bellies hurt. And James would have been their peaceful big brother, keeping everyone calm. Frank found her there one spring morning when the boys were 7 and 5, both fast asleep after a particularly exhausting day of helping with farm chores. "Talking to them again?" he asked, settling beside her in the wildflower patch that had grown thick and beautiful over the years. "Always. They're still part of our family, Frank. They always will be, I know. Sometimes I catch myself setting 6 places at the table instead of 4. Mary Beth leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the sweet scent of the flowers that bloomed every year without fail. "Do you think we'll see them again, someday?" "I think when we get to heaven, we're going to find out they've been keeping busy," Frank said. "Probably got the whole place organized by now. Sarah would have the angels in matching outfits. Michael would have found every secret passageway. Anna would be leading the heavenly choir, and James would be making sure everyone felt included." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the farm where they'd planted so much love and soil, in hearts, in the daily rhythms of a life lived fully despite its losses. That was the night Mary Beth knew their family was complete, not because she couldn't have more children, but because she finally understood what Frank had meant all those years ago. When he wished for enough, they had enough love to fill a lifetime, enough memories to treasure forever, enough family both earthly and heavenly to satisfy any heart. But life, it seemed, had other plans. Samuel was 10 and Thomas was 8 when they made their own announcement. "We want to get married," Samuel declared over Sunday dinner with the seriousness only a 10-year-old could muster. To whom Mary Beth asked, trying not to smile. "Each other," Thomas added helpfully. "So we can live together forever and have lots of babies." Frank choked on his iced tea. Mary Beth patted him on the back while trying to explain the finer points of how families actually worked. You can't marry each other, sweethearts, you're brothers. But we want to have babies together, Samuel insisted. When you grow up, you'll find wives to have babies with, Mary Beth explained. And those babies will be your children, and Daddy and I will be the grandparents. The boys considered this. Will we have lots of babies? Thomas asked. As many as God sees fit to bless you with. Good, Samuel said with finality. Because we're going to need a big family. Mary Beth and Frank exchanged glances across the table. There was something about the way Samuel said it, not like a child's fantasy, but like a prophecy. And in the years that followed, it began to feel more and more like one. Samuel grew up to be exactly the kind of man Mary Beth had known he would. Be steady, thoughtful, kind. He became a teacher, married his college sweetheart Emma, and together they had 5 children in 7 years. 5, Mary Beth exclaimed when Samuel called to announce the birth of their youngest daughter. Samuel Hope Calloway, are you trying to give me a heart attack? We're just getting started, Mama, Samuel said, and Mary Beth could hear the smile in his voice. Emma wants 8 children. She says our house feels empty with just 5. Mary Beth, who was babysitting 3 of those 5 children at the time while their parents were at the hospital, looked around her kitchen. Samuel Jr. was teaching his cousin to make paper airplanes. The twins were having a tea party with Bonaparte, who was surprisingly patient about wearing a doll's hat. Baby Grace was napping in the same cradle Frank had carved 40 years earlier. Empty was not the word she would have used. Thomas, meanwhile, had followed his mother's path in a different direction. He became a nurse, specializing in maternity care, and married a fellow nurse named Hope, a coincidence that made Mary Beth tear up every time she thought about it. I wanted to help other families the way Dr. Morrison helped ours, Thomas explained when he chose his specialty. I wanted to be there for the scared mamas who've lost babies before, to help them believe that sometimes miracles really do happen. Thomas and Hope had 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls, who inherited their father's adventurous spirit and their mother's practical nature. By the time Mary Beth was 60, she was grandmother to 11 grandchildren, with more on the way. It's like a small army, Frank said one Christmas morning, watching children ranging in age from infant to teenager tear through wrapping paper with joyful abandon. It's like a blessing, Mary Beth corrected, bouncing baby number 12 on her knee while keeping an eye on the 3-year-old, who was trying to feed Christmas cookies to the dog. But they were just getting started, because Samuel and Thomas's children grew up in homes where big families were the norm, where love was abundant, and where every child was celebrated as a miracle, whether they were the 1st or the 15th. And when those children grew up and started families of their own, well, that's when the Calloway family tree really began to flourish. Samuel's oldest son married at 22 and had 7 children. His daughter had 9. The twins each had 6. Baby Grace grew up to have what she called a small family, only for children. But she made up for it by adopting 3 more. Thomas's children were equally prolific. His eldest had 8 children. His second son had 10. His daughters had 6, 7, and 5 children respectively. His youngest son, who everyone thought would be the bachelor of the family, surprised everyone by marrying a widow with 4 children and then having 6 more of their own. And those grandchildren, they grew up with the same understanding their parents had inherited, that children were blessings, that love multiplied rather than divided, and that a full house was a happy house. By Mary Beth's 70th birthday, she had 43 grandchildren and 18 great-grandchildren. By her 75th birthday, the count had risen to 51 grandchildren and 37 great-grandchildren. I've lost count, she admitted to Frank as they prepared for that year's family reunion. But I don't think it matters. Love doesn't need to be counted, it just needs to be shared. The annual Calloway family reunion had outgrown the farmhouse, the barn, and eventually the entire farm. By Mary Beth's 80th birthday, they were renting the county fairgrounds just to fit everyone under one roof. Mary Beth stood at the entrance that morning, watching car after car pull into the parking lot. Minivans and SUVs and pickup trucks, all packed with children who carried her eyes, Frank's stubborn chin, and the unshakable belief that family was the most important thing in the world. "How many are we expecting?" Frank asked, adjusting the banner that read Calloway Family Reunion 2023 to 150, strong and growing. "I stopped counting at 120, Mary Beth admitted, but Emma brought a clipboard. She's been keeping track. Samuel's wife Emma had indeed arrived with military-level organization, complete with color-coded name tags, a detailed schedule, and what appeared to be a small army of teenagers, assigned to keep track of the youngest children. Aunt Mary Beth called a voice from across the parking lot. Thomas's youngest daughter, Hope, named for her mother and grandmother both, was approaching with a baby carrier in one arm and a toddler on her hip. Meet the newest addition, little Mary Elizabeth." Mary Beth's eyes filled with tears as she looked down at the tiny baby who shared her name. "She's beautiful, honey, just beautiful. She's number 6 for us," Hope said proudly, "and probably not the last." All around them, the reunion was organizing itself into the controlled chaos that had become tradition. The teenagers set up games for the little ones. The men clustered around Frank, listening to his stories about the early days of the farm. The women gathered around Mary Beth, sharing updates on pregnancies, schools, jobs, and the million small details that made up the life of a family with more branches than a Georgia oak. "Mama," Samuel said, appearing at her elbow with his arm around a young woman Mary Beth didn't recognize. "I want you to meet someone special." The woman was obviously pregnant, about 6 months along, and had the kind of shy smile that reminded Mary Beth of herself at that age. "This is David's girlfriend, Sarah," Samuel continued. David was Samuel's second son, 24 years old and, according to his father, finally ready to settle down. "Sarah," Mary Beth said warmly, taking the young woman's hands. "What a beautiful name. One of my favorite names in the whole world." Sarah's face lit up. "David told me about your first daughter. I hope it's okay that we chose this name." Mary Beth felt her heart expand in the way it always did when she realized how deeply their story had been woven into the family's understanding of itself. "Honey, it's more than okay. It's perfect." She would have loved knowing there was another Sarah in the family. That afternoon, during the traditional storytelling hour, Mary Beth found herself surrounded by great-grandchildren who had never heard the full story of how their enormous family had begun. "Tell us about the old days, great-grandma," demanded 5-year-old Frank Jr., Thomas's grandson, named for his great-grandfather. "Tell us about when you and great-grandpa were young." Mary Beth looked out over the sea of faces, babies and toddlers and teenagers and young adults, all of them connected to her and Frank by an unbroken chain of love that had started with 2 people who refused to let heartbreak have the last word. "Well," she began, settling into the storytelling voice she'd perfected over decades of bedtime stories. "Once upon a time, your great-grandpa and I lived on a farm with a very ornery rooster named Bonaparte." She told them about the early years of their marriage, about the babies who came and went too soon, about learning to love completely without guaranteeing outcomes, about Samuel and Thomas, their miracle boys who grew up to be amazing men and fathers. But mostly, she told them about love. "The thing you have to understand," she said, looking directly at the teenagers who were old enough to grasp the deeper meanings, "is that every single one of you was wanted before you were even born. Not just by your parents, but by all of us, by the whole family. Because we learned a long time ago that children aren't just gifts, they're trust. They're proof that love is stronger than anything that tries to stop it." A hand shot up from the middle of the group. "Great-grandma, how many babies did you have altogether?" Mary Beth smiled. 6 babies grew in my belly, for went to heaven to wait for us, to stay here to fill our hearts and our house with joy. But how many babies do you have now?" the child persisted. Mary Beth looked around the fairgrounds at the children playing, the babies sleeping, the teenagers laughing, the young adults sharing their own stories of new romances and growing families. "All of them," she said simply. "Every single one of you. You're all my babies, just at different stages of growing up." That evening, As the sun set over the fairgrounds and families began the process of loading tired children into cars for the drive home, Mary Beth and Frank sat on lawn chairs near the entrance, watching their legacy say goodbye. 153, Frank repeated slowly, from 6 pregnancies. From the people who decided love was worth the risk, Mary Beth corrected, every single time. As they drove home that night, the farmhouse seemed almost shockingly quiet after the joyful noise of the reunion. Strange to think it all started here, Frank said, pulling into their driveway. It's not strange, Mary Beth said, looking out at the oak tree where wildflowers still bloomed every spring. It's exactly right. This is where we learned that love doesn't end. It just grows. Inside the house, Mary Beth went to the closet and pulled out the box she'd kept hidden for so many years. But it wasn't hidden anymore. Over the decades, it had become a family treasure, shared with children and grandchildren who wanted to understand their history. She opened it slowly, touching the photos and hospital bracelets and tiny booties with the same reverence she'd always felt. "Hello, my darlings," she whispered to the pictures of Sarah, Michael, Anna, and baby James. "You should see what happened today. You should see all the children who came after you, all the love that grew from missing you." Frank appeared in the doorway, watching his wife continue the conversation she'd been having for 40 years. "Think they know?" he asked, just as he had all those years ago. "I think they've been orchestrating it," Mary Beth said, holding up Sarah's photo. "I think they've been sending us all these babies, one by one, to make sure their love story continues." She closed the box gently and stood, taking Frank's hand. "We did good, didn't we?" Frank looked around their bedroom, the same room where Samuel and Thomas had been conceived, where Mary Beth had spent so many months growing babies with perfect love, where they'd planned and dreamed and hoped their way through decades of marriage. "We did better than good," he said. "We did exactly what we were supposed to do." Mary Beth lived to be 91. Frank lived to be 90-3. By the time they went to join Sarah, Michael, Anna, and baby James in heaven, the Calloway family had grown to include over 100 living members spread across 4 generations. Their funeral was held at the county fairgrounds, the only place big enough to hold everyone who wanted to say goodbye. The obituary in the local paper read simply, "Mary Beth and Frank Calloway, beloved parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and great-great-grandparents, survived by 247 descendants, and countless lives touched by their example of persistent love." But the real tribute wasn't in the newspaper. It was in the faces of the children who carried their genes, their values, and their unshakable belief that every baby was a blessing worth celebrating. It was in the young mothers who called their own mothers when pregnancy tests came back positive, sharing the news with the same joy Mary Beth had modeled for decades. It was in the fathers who built cribs with the same careful attention Frank had given to his. It was in the grandparents who told bedtime stories about great-great-grandparents who had loved bigger than their losses. And it was in the wildflowers that still bloomed every spring around the oak tree, planted by children who understood that some love stories never end. They just keep growing, one baby at a time, one generation at a time, one perfect, persistent act of love at a time. The Calloway family farm is still there, passed down through the generations, still hosting annual reunions that require multiple venues and military-level logistics. And every spring, when the wildflowers bloom around the oak tree, someone always brings fresh seeds to scatter, because Mary Beth taught them that love plants itself everywhere it's welcomed. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very persistent and very brave about loving without guarantees, it grows into something bigger and more beautiful than you ever imagined possible. If you believe that every child is a blessing, no matter how brief their time, this story will restore your faith in love's power to multiply miracles. Subscribe to Still Standing Souls for more stories that prove love is stronger than loss. Share your heart. How has love multiplied in your family? Tell us about the babies who made you who you are.